The sea at Dragonstone wore a skin of iron that morning, dark and still. The breath of dawn held tight between cliff and cloud as if the world itself waited for a word that had not yet been spoken. Jon stood where the basalt dropped to foam, fingers curled against the wind. Somewhere far below, the waves combed the rocks with a cold patience. Rhaegal crouched on a ledge above him, one wing mantled to the wind, the scar that crossed the stretched green membrane like a rope burned into salt-stiff canvas. The dragon's breath came in slow gusts that smelled of ash and wet stone. When Rhaegal turned his head, the great gold eye found Jon, and something like recognition moved behind its lidless glare. The first gull of morning passed between them, a pale pennon torn across shadow. Jon watched it go and thought of bells, how Tyrion had said the bells meant mercy, meant surrender, meant a kind of future where steel could be put away. But bells were iron, too, put to a post, struck by a hand. A bell's song still came from a blow. Boots scraped behind him. Davos Seaworth drew his cloak tighter and came to Jon's side, taking the clumsy care of a man who has already seen too much fall away. The Onion Knight looked once at Rhaegal, once at the sea, and then at Jon, measuring the silence between them like a sailor measuring depth with a line. "She won't sleep," Davos said. "Not since the walls took the girl's head. Your queen looks at the fire the way I used to look at the sky in the Stormlands, waiting for it to break on her." Jon said nothing. That was all he did well lately. Bite words until his mouth tasted of iron and not say a thing. In the distance, where the sea met the world, there was already a bruised line of ships that weren't ships, a smear of intent waiting beyond the curve of the day. He could hear it if he let himself. The ratcheting clack of scorpions winding, ropes and iron singing, the hush of a crowd pressed into itself until air turned to prayer. He had been a boy at Winterfell when the bells rang for his father's justice, and he had learned that the sound could mean an ending or a beginning, and often both at once. The wind tasted like snow even in spring. "Ser Davos," Jon said, not turning his head. "In King's Landing, if the walls are shut and the bay is steel, if the gates are barred for the Golden Company and their horns, if all that's left is stone and fear, how do you move a city?" Davos made the small sound a man makes when a cut is pressed to. "City doesn't move," he said after a time. "You move its people. Gates are one thing. There are other holes in any old place. Drains that spit into the river at ebb. Posterns bricked up that never quite forgot air. Tunnels under hill and keep. Fleets are one way of closing a mouth. Not every mouth is shut by the sea." Jon turned then. The wind had made his hair damp and stiff. He could taste brine in it. "Will you show me?" Davos looked at him as if Jon had asked whether water could burn. "I can find holes, lad. I've smuggled onions and men sweeter and half as honest. But you aren't thinking of smuggling in." "Out," Jon said. The word was strange in his mouth. Felt like the first breath after a cold startle. "Tyrion says the bells. He says if they ring, the city surrenders. But surrender is not a word for women with children pressed to their skirts. It's a word for men at arms. Grey Worm looks at surrender one way, my men another. The Dothraki don't have a word for it. He stopped there, because her name inside him had too many edges. If the bells ring and the streets are still wide with people, what good does it do? The first spark takes the first dry thing, and everything is dry." Davos's eyes slid to the dragon again, considering, as if Rhaegal were a card put down on a table. "You'd use him." "I'd use anything that keeps them alive." Jon lifted his chin to the cliff. Rhaegal's tail bracketed stone. The sound of his breath was a smith's bellows at the edge of hearing. "He came to me once, not in words. He let me touch. The queen dreams of burning her enemy. Let her burn their iron. Let me carry word ahead of fire. Draw the people out. Not a sack. An empty room. And if the queen decides an empty room is still a room meant for flame?" Davos asked, not unkindly. "Then at least it is empty." Jon closed his hand and opened it. He felt the old ache in his fingers where Ghost's thick ruff had knotted under blood. "And I'll stand between her and the room if I can." Davos looked out at the line of the ships again, though there were no banners on them yet and no wind to fill them. You plan it with the imp. He's got a mind for rabbit runs. Me, I'll put lads who can't run anymore to watching the tides. There's a voice in any city that belongs to the water. I can hear it if I stand quiet. I'll show you where the mouth opens when it wants to spit." Jon nodded. His neck felt stiff, as if some invisible hand had gripped it for a long while and only now let go. "Thank you." "Don't thank me until after," Davos said, and his mouth twisted. "Better men than me have been thanked in advance and buried before the bill was paid." They went to the map room when the light had climbed high enough to set the windows along the keep's eastern face like a row of dull coins, the sea behind them bright and flat as a wall. Tyrion was already there, a cup that had not been drunk from in his hand, eyes green and worn. The table was a relief map of dragons and mountains and rivers, an old queen's toy for ordering worlds that did not bend to rule. "You're early, Lord Snow," Tyrion said, dry as a drum head in drought. "Or late. The days have lost their edges." Jon told him while the light crawled across the painted wood. He told him quietly. The plan sounded thinner spoken than it had sounded inside him, but there was steel in the quiet. Davos's finger made a slow path across the river on the painted table, down the black tongue where the Blackwater rush licked the city's stone. He tapped 3 times. "Here. Mudgate 2 watched, but there's a choked culvert 200 yards upriver. Here. A postern behind the dragon pit, bricked up after Maegor but not by a mason worth paying. I could smell the air through it as a boy. And here." His finger came to the slope of Rhaenys' hill and the blind side of the Red Keep, where the rock folded into shadow. Old wells with mouths that open under the keep and close as they please. I wouldn't send a child there, but if I were desperate, I'd send a man. Tyrion pinched the bridge of his nose. The air smelled of old wax and salt. "The city is a maze designed by a drunk with delusions of architecture," he said. "I know half the holes in it and suspect the other half of being cleverer than me. This," he tapped Davos's spots, "could work in a sane world, and I have not seen one of those in some time." "Your queen won't like holes in her plans," Davos said. "No," Tyrion agreed. "She won't. She likes doors. Large ones she can walk through while we watch and call it destiny." He looked at Jon, and something in that look weighed the sword and the hand. "You'd ride the dragon over the city. You'd drop call for evacuation. A dragon calling for mercy." He laughed once, a sound like a cough. "The irony is so thick I could butter bread with it." "Not mercy," Jon said, and felt the word click inside him like a thing he'd finally set right on the shelf it was built for. "Warning." "Even better," Tyrion muttered. "They'll listen. Some will think you're a trick. Some will think you're a savior. Most will run wherever their neighbor runs. The city's like that. You'll need hands in the streets. Men with a face not worth stabbing. Davos can get you river rats who don't bleed easy. I can send a few old friends who owe me their teeth. Varys has birds," Davos said. "Whispers go quicker than feet." Tyrion's eyes went to the door a moment, and for a heartbeat the clever mask he had held since Winterfell slipped. "Varys is complicated, as men who live behind curtains of their own spinning often are." He set the cup down. "I'll risk complicated. It's the simple things that get you killed. Knives and fire and men who know only one thing." He leaned forward. "What you ask will make her choose. You understand that?" Jon did. Tyrion saw it in him and gave the small nod that men give each other when they share a weight that cannot be shifted by talk. "Tell her," Tyrion said, "you are still the one man she listens to without pretending she doesn't." He found Daenerys in the chamber that had once belonged to Stannis, though the ghost of the Baratheon king held no interest for a woman who carried her storms in her own bones. She stood with her back to the window and the light flared in her hair like a banner on fire. Grey Worm waited like a statue carved of basalt at the door. When Jon entered, both turned, and there was the old ache of longing in him, clean and hard as a blade held in winter. "You run from me even when you come towards me," she said, a little smile that had no warmth in it touching her mouth. "Is it the crown that frightens you? I cannot help the head I bear it on." "The city," Jon said. His voice was plain. "Let me empty it." Her eyes narrowed, the violet deepening. "Empty it?" she repeated, tasting the phrase as if to find poison in it. "As you would empty a cup. Into the sea. Onto the hills," Jon said. "Into the country. Any road that takes people out of a place where fire could be. They'll follow a dragon because they fear it. They'll follow a word because they hope it. Give them both together and some will answer. If enough answer, then." He did not say, "Then your anger has nowhere to go but stone." He did not say, "Then there will be no eyes below when you pass over with Drogon. Then no child burns." She looked at him for a long while, and the room narrowed around her gaze until he could feel the wind on the cliff again, even here, smell the iron of the sea and the old smoke in the stones. "I am not my father," she said at last, not for the first time, and their shared history made the words a bruise. "They ring the bells, they live. That was what your hand told mine, with the weight of his own name laid on the promise. I will take the city from Cersei. I will take the throne from under a lie. It is not the children who have made me this lonely." "Let me try," Jon said. "If it fails, nothing changes. You take what you mean to take." She stepped closer, so close he could see the way a small vein beat under the skin near her temple. So close he could have counted the breaths that made her chest lift. "And if it succeeds," she said, voice gone low, "and they look up at you with gratitude in their eyes? If they cheer the man on the green dragon who told them to flee and thank him for sparing them from their queen." The words were sharp as glass but went deeper than glass. "You tell me what you are, Jon Snow, and I will tell you what it makes me." "I am yours," he said, because it was the truth that cost him the most to hold and because there was no lie in him that could help her. "Whatever else I am yours. Let me do this, and when the bells ring you will know that if they don't burn it is because of you. You are the one who gave them the chance to run." She looked at him as a woman looks at a door she cannot quite bring herself to open, both afraid of what is inside and more afraid of not knowing. After a time she nodded once. "Go, take the green, tell them, but look at me." He did. "When the bells ring, if they ring, I will take the Red Keep. I will take her." Her voice had iron in it. "There will be no parley with Cersei. I have tried words with women who take heads in answer. I am tired of their answers." Grey Worm's mouth flattened in a line that was not disapproval. He had no interest in the softness of this world. Jon bowed his head. He could give her that much even now, and left with Davos already waiting his heels like a tide. They made a plan that had too many small hinges and too few strong bolts, and they hammered what bolts they could. Varys came, night-footed, with the shadows of graceful children clinging to him like the ragged hem of a cloak, and never asked why he was asked before the hand was told. He read the messages Davos and Jon drafted, the words plain and free of the fingers Tyrion would have left on them had he shaped them, then took a quill and sanded the edges, made them fly. He sent them in hands too young to be noticed, with pennies to spend and crumbs to eat, and by morning there were whispers moving through Flea Bottom that did not sound like Cersei's and were no kinder. Fishwives told each other that a dragon would pass at dawn and cry where to go, and that men at the gates would hold their spears out for them, not against them. The story changed from mouth to mouth like water finding its own shape. It hardly mattered. Fear is a horse that will run toward any rider. Jon climbed Rhaegal when the sky was still the color of a pewter plate, a dull shine beneath the thin cloud, and the dragon came up under him like a hill rising. The leather went tight and warm between his hands. Rhaegal's scars glistened when the first light found them. He smelled the creature again. Sulfur and old meat, but alive, stubbornly, gloriously alive, and thought of a sword thrust that had found the ribs but not the heart. He remembered the snap of a scorpion's bolt, the gasp that had gone through the men beneath as if they, too, had taken it, and the slamming shock when Rhaegal had fallen toward the water. He remembered lifting the great head, hot and heavy, when they had heaved on ropes to bring him to a likely shelf, and the way the dragon had turned his eye to him with a fury that was not hatred but a refusal to quit. He whispered to him the way he would have whispered to a horse in a storm, and when Rhaegal launched the world fell away in a tumble of air and foam. The sky opened its hands to them, Jon closed his knees and felt the giant pulse of muscle and air under him, as if he had set his body astride the breath of a god. They came to the city by the river. The Blackwater made a long S beneath them. The walls rose like dull teeth. Above them the Red Keep crouched, a fat cat that had grown old, snapping birds from balconies. There were scorpions on the walls like thorns on a vine, and Jon felt Rhaegal's long body twitch with the memory of pain when he saw them. He stroked the thick neck once and leaned Rhaegal into a wide circle out of range. The first cry he loosed was not fire. It was sound. Rhaegal's roar broke the morning like a dropped plate, sound shivering through bricks and into bone, jolting men from sleep and rats from walls, and setting every sparrow in the city flinging itself into the air at once. It was a word the city had not heard in a century, a sound that said dragon in a tongue older than men. Jon had tied cloth to the leather in his left hand, a rag of white with a simple mark in charcoal that any child could read, an arrow pointing to a hill. He had written the other signs 100 times the night before with a hand that still remembered his name as a bastard. He lofted the cloth and let it snap. Then he spoke. They had made him say the words plain. They had made him practice them to take the north from the ice and give it to the city. He had no gift for speech. He had a voice that ironed words out of their fine shirts and sent them to work. It carried, though, on the back of terror and hope and the fact that men look up when there is a shadow as wide as a street over their houses. "Hear me," he called, and Rhaegal's roar took the last syllable and hammered it across stone. "Your queen asks you to live. Leave your doors. Take your children. Go to the dragon pit. There is safe passage at the river gate and the postern on Rhaenys' hill. The bells will ring. Go to the bells. Live." He said it again and again until the words were not words anymore in his mouth but a beat to fly by. Below, the city shook itself awake, the way a dog shakes water from its coat. He saw rooftops go from gray to color as shutters opened and hands came out, palms up to the air. He saw faces lift one by one like candles being lit. He saw the first people run, to doors, to alleys, to each other. On the river, at the culvert Davos had marked with a fishbone on the map table, men waded knee-deep in cold water with knotted ropes around their middles, their mouths open to make their breathing quiet. A brick was pried out of the culvert mouth, then another. The water took the dust away in a long dark ribbon. One man shouldered a strut, grunted, and wrenched. Something inside groaned, the kind of sound a throat makes when it is used again after a long illness. The culvert sighed and opened its heart to the river. When the first boy came, he still had a fish in his hand. At the bricked postern, men with picks whose calluses told a story to any other hand willing to hear it pulled at old mortar until it broke under sweat. A cold breath pushed out at them, Earth's breath, and that was when a woman in a cap that had seen too many kitchens came and pressed a flat of bread into one of the men's hands and kissed his forehead with a mouth that had lost teeth. "I heard a dragon," she said, as if answering a question no one had asked. "I heard he said go." Jon and Rhaegal flew the loop until the sun came over the hills and made the roofs shine like scales. With each pass, the lines of people grew fatter, slower, more tangled, and then a strange order began to assert itself the way a herd will find itself a lane when pressed. Mothers at the sides holding children's hands, men with carts and ropes, old men who had never walked so quickly shuffling, as if late to a dinner they wanted to attend. Davos's river rats were in ragged pairs at corners, pointing and lying in, cajoling and sometimes simply putting a hand on a shoulder and pushing. Tyrion had done his part. He had sent a man with a loud voice to the bells at the September of Baelor that no longer was, to the smaller bells that remained at the September of the Black Cells, and to the tower near the Street of Flower. "When you hear the dragon again, ring," the man told the bellkeepers, who loved their bells more than they loved their skin. "Ring once to call them and again to tell them you are ringing because the city is surrendering. Ring them until your arms die." Above the river mouth, sails snapped all at once. Euron Greyjoy's longships had taken their teeth from the bay like a rake from a garden bed, and now they showed those teeth to the morning. "Go," Jon whispered, but the word was for another set of wings. The shadow that came then was black as a coal held in a fist. Drogon dove from the eastern sky with Daenerys on his neck, as if she were made to live in that exact notch of thorn. They came at the bay like a shard of night thrown into daylight. The first scorpions to loose from the ships broke their own strings with the eagerness of their release and sent their iron crying uselessly into the sea. The next few bolts arced horned and terrible through air, and Drogon moved as if the air were a road only he knew. Flame took the nearest ship with a sound like a field of wheat deciding to turn to glass. The next 3 ships went so quickly after that Jon, who knew the names of every man he had killed and most of those he had watched die, could not count sailors without thinking of numbers as a cruelty. Rhaegal roared, and they went together toward the walls. The scorpions there were worse. Their crews were hungry and close enough to taste their own fear like a mint between the teeth. One bolt kissed Rhaegal's left wing and tore a new hole through Old Scar. He staggered in the air with a suddenness that made Jon's stomach drop, then recovered and beat harder. Jon felt the tremor of pain pass down the long body and clenched his jaw until he could taste blood. "Not again," he said, aloud and to the air and to any god interested in this small prayer. They struck the first wall scorpion not with fire but with weight. Rhaegal dropped and shouldered into the stout wood carriage as a warhorse would shoulder into another at the lists, teeth finding rope and iron and breaking them like twigs. Men screamed. Jon smelled singed hair and piss. He let Rhaegal have a taste of fire for the second scorpion, a short blast that curled over the rampart and left 4 men rolling with their clothing slicked to their skin. The third he pointed out to Daenerys with a lift of his hand, and Drogon's answer was a long jet so bright that it left a scar burned into Jon's eyes for heartbeats afterward. They opened corridors this way, no careful lanes because fire does not know care, but clearings where men would not stand. Rhaegal's flame etched a line along the roof-pitched streets leading from Flea Bottom to the slope of the Dragon Pit, burning thatch that would have burned anyway if a spark had found it later, sending sparks ahead of itself that hissed out on stones Davos's men were wetting with buckets and skins. Not every corner could be saved. Not every house had time to be told it ought to live. There were screams, small and thin and shrieking and then not, and Jon counted them too because that is what a man who hates war owes it. On the fields before the gate of the gods, gold moved like tidewater. The Golden Company had drawn ranks with the slow pride of men who had not yet been taught what kind of enemy a dragon is. They had elephants there, and those beasts lifted their trunks and cried to a sky that did not care about their memory of hot savannas and wide rivers. The Dothraki rode the field like smoke-made men, their whoops slicing the morning into ragged strips. Jon watched it all from a high circle and thought of sand moving under wave. He did not love the Dothraki's hunger for killing, but he could not help but love the wild exactness of the riding. The bells began under it all, soft at first, then present, then insistent. They came from different towers, not quite together, until they found each other and began to speak with one throat. The sound rolled over the roofs and through the bones of the walls and out across the fields, and it was like a hand laid on the head of a dog that wants to bite and is told to wait. A ripple went through the Golden Company. Jon saw men look over their shoulders the way children look when called with their full names by mothers with wet hands. He saw the elephants shift, uncertain. He saw, bright as if it were happening at his own stirrup, the banner at the center sag and then dip like a fish taking a line. The gate opened, not all the way as it had for parades and kings before, but enough for a man to put his shoulder to and then another and make space for the morning to come in. The first out were not soldiers. They were a bundle of women with belts crossed over their chests like harness and their mouths set. Behind them came men with red dust on their sleeves and the careful eyes of people who had learned not to show care, each with 2 children glommed to his legs like gulls to a tide line. The Golden Company had put themselves between the gate and the city. Now they were in the way. Their captain, a man whose name Tyrion would later tell Jon was Strickland, commanded them to hold. He might as well have commanded Sun to hold. When Drogon dropped and exhaled, the world between gold and flame ceased to have a shape that mattered. Jon brought Rhaegal down hard in front of the swell of people to push them to the sides of the road with a bulk that could not be reasoned with. He raised his arm again. "River Gate," he called, pointing. "Dragon Pit. This way. Stay to the walls." He had to make his voice a hammer. Men know how to move when ordered by a hammer. Cries came B.A.C.K. Some curses, some prayers, some simple exhalations of air that were gratitude by another name. On the wall above him, gray worms stood in formation with unsullied men who had never once, in all their lives, flinched. Their eyes did not go to the children. They went to the Lannister soldiers who were lowering their swords because the bells told them to. Jon saw the exact moment Grey Worm's jaw clenched, the exact moment he chose to throw his spear, the exact moment he made his grief a weapon because he had been told since boyhood that grief was weakness unless it killed. He moved Rhaegal without thinking, a body as long as a street shifting up and between angles. The spear struck scales and clattered uselessly away. The shock of the deflection turned heads. The next spear in Grey Worm's hand stilled. "No," Jon said, and his voice carried because there was a dragon's throat under him and because his face was bare where Grey Worm's was not. "The bells." Grey Worm looked at him. No love there, but some complicated recognition all the same. The kind men have when they have bled near each other and not for each other. He did not nod. He simply did not throw. His men did not move. The line held like a snake deciding not to coil this once. No order holds entire in a city of that size. Not even one that carries dragons on its breath and bells under its feet. In alleys, men with knives took what knives are always taken for. On roofs, fires started that no one set, because roofs are tinder and sparks are fairies that love trouble. In a square near the Street of Flower, a boy threw a stone at a soldier because the soldier was there and because his father had died holding that street and because if he did not throw that stone the world would not make sense to him. That soldier, whose ears were ringing with the bells and with the hissed orders of a man who did not speak his language, struck the boy with the flat of his sword because he had not been told how else to be. Across a bridge, a woman dropped a bundle thinking it was a pot. It was her child asleep, and the child woke into a scream that cut through a Dothraki laugh and made the rider look away from the man he had meant to kill next. That man ran. The rider scowled. A dragon's shadow passed over all of it and made it, for a moment, the same story. Jaime Lannister bled in a different part of the city and did not know his own blood by the color on his hand because it had been too long since it mattered whether it was his or someone else's. He had come by river in a skiff that stank of fish and men who had found their saddest jokes in the pockets of their oldest coats. He had been stopped twice by loyal gold cloaks and once by an old woman selling nettles who recognized him with the clean surprised children show sparrows. Tyrion had told him to go under and through and up and keep his brother's voice in his ear telling him where to turn. He had chosen to listen because it was the last choice he knew how to make that had anything to do with love. He reached the base of the keep's cliff with lungs like empty bellows and hands that would not stop shaking. The passage Tyrion had shown him took him into the shadow under the Red Keep where the rocks smelt of bat droppings and secrets. He climbed stairs that were too narrow for the man he had been when both his hands had worked, and at the top he met Qyburn's men and the smell of wildfire. Qyburn had not been idle. Cersei had learned to love a certain shade of green, and when women who love a thing are made finally to fear losing it, they always gather too much of it to themselves and call it the last time. The caches had been laid like beads under certain streets. They had been set under staging, behind old shutters, inside dried cisterns, under bridges where the water ran so slow that even flame could think. The plan had been to let the dragons come and then open the fire beneath them like a trapdoor. Qyburn's men did not light them. They broke under the weight of bells the way men break under the weight of other men's eyes. Some ran. The few who did as they were told did it with a fervor that begets mistakes. One jar struck a stone at an angle and cracked. Another rolled into a puddle that was not water but tallow, and everyone around it slipped and painted themselves with green that did not yet have teeth. Jaime saw the wick, saw the spill, and for an instant he thought of a boy leaning over the edge of a tower with wind in his hair. He kicked the jar hard and sent it skittering into a drainage channel so battered by age that it held little to burn. Cersei stood with Qyburn in the window where she could see the river and the smudge of smoke and the frightening, beautiful loop of two dragons moving as if two hands had decided to speak in a language only they understood. Her face was bare of paint. Jaime knew it like men know a road that they have walked drunk and sober both. She did not look surprised to see him. The thing in her eyes that was not a tear and not a light either moved, and her mouth made the smallest shape he had ever seen it make. Qyburn made a noise like a rat being stood on. "Your Grace," he said, "we must go down." "We must go," Cersei said, and the "we" was not a thing she had shared with many. There was a corridor below the throne room that Cersei knew better than any map. She had not thought to use it. Queens use reminding only when they are cornered. Now she went to it with Jaime at her shoulder and Qyburn at her side and Ser Gregor hulking behind. And it was a strange procession of kingship and sin and the ugly strength that protects both. They ran. The mountain ran like a house running. On the hill, the dragon pit filled, old stone moaning under the weight of people. Davos stood on the slope with a stick in his hand beating time, shouting his hoarse river voice. "Keep moving, you lot. Watch the old ones. Mind your feet. Mind your feet. The hill's steeper than it looks. If your neighbor falls, pick him up. Don't step over him. We're none of us pretty enough to be trampled for our faces." A girl in rags tugged at his sleeve. "Mister," she said, "what if my mamp's in the tanner's court? She'll come that way, but the smoke's there. She'll smell of piss and lie and come out the way she wants." Davos told her, not unkindly, because he had learned that lies told kindly sometimes get men killed. "You stay put somewhere high where the smoke doesn't go. A mam can find a child easier than a child can find a mam." Arya Stark moved through the city with a map written behind her eyes in pain. She had come to kill a queen and had found instead people who were not queens and not soldiers and not men she had met in lists in her head at night. She took the hand of a child whose face was not wrong enough to be ugly and not right enough to be safe and put it in the hand of a baker who had flour on his eyelids like snow and said, "Take her to the hill or I'll find you later." She saw the hound where no one else would have seen a man too broad for the doorway he was in, and they looked at each other like old stones look at the rain. "She's leaving," the hound rasped. "Good," Arya said. "Then there's nothing left to take from her." "You're learning," he muttered, but there was something like satisfaction in it. The rare coin he spent so seldom that it had not even warmed to his hand. He turned his head, listening. "Hear that?" At first it was only sound folded into sound. Bells beaten into the whine of fear, beaten into the stamps of feet, all beaten into the bass thrum of dragons' wings. Then it found its own shape. A rush, the sound of air inside tunnels. The humph of flame given a mouth too big for its body. The nearest wildfire cache took a light. The square near the tanners lit green as the inside of a sea cave at noon. Men screamed and became candles in an eye blink. Jon saw the color the way a man sees that he has cut himself deeper than a nick, clean and absolute. He kicked Rhaegal into a dive that built its own wind, pulled up short, and cut a trench with fire along the edge of the blaze so that it would not climb the next row of houses. The green licked at the orange with disdain and then settled for what meal it had. He sucked air like a man surfacing. "More," he said. "There will be more." There were. The city popped green like a field of toadstools after rain. Daenerys saw them too and understood. She turned Drogon into a spiral and began to cut circles of fire around the green mouths as you would cut a moat around a keep to keep it from wanting to go to war with your neighbor. She did it well, precisely, like a woman who had been taught to thread needles in a palace she barely remembered. In the window of the Red Keep, Cersei watched the girl with dragon's breath make order of her fear, and the thing in her eyes that might have been water moved again. Qyburn grabbed for her arm, polite to the last habit. "Your Grace," he said. "Please." Ser Gregor's great head turned like a tower, changing the way it overlooked a courtyard. He recognized nothing and no one in real terms, but he recognized movement and threat. He lifted his sword because his sword was an extension of a thought that never changed. The corridor led to a stair that led to a door that opened on another stair that had been blocked by a fall that had happened years ago, when a Lannister who had not been born yet was still a coin in the mind of a lion with a different mane. Jaime looked at it and laughed once, a broken thing falling out of him. He put his shoulder to stone and pushed. He hated the weight that was part of him now, the old strength gone like a song sung too often. He felt something give. Another hand came to the block beside his without touch. It was Cersei's hand, and it was shaking, and it was hers. They moved rock together. Qyburn stood aside with the delicate horror of a man watching a rare vase be used to break another vase. Ser Gregor did what he had always done and waited until killing was needed. They came out not where they had meant to. That is what cities do. They lead you where they like, not where you think you are going. They found themselves in the base of the keep near the courtyard where once Jaime had trained a boy who would become a man who would die to prevent wolves and dragons from marrying in a different world. There was sunlight there, odd and clean, as if the world outside had been polished and pressed to the window. They could hear the bells as if it were a hand on the other side of a door and the bells were knocking. They could hear dragons. Then they heard a voice. Cersei. It was Tyrion's voice, and it did not wobble though his heart did. Tyrion hated his heart for that. He stood with his hands out as if to show he held nothing that could hurt except ideas. Ser Gregor moved 6 inches and could have crossed the space and cut his brother into two of something uglier than one thing. But Qyburn, to his own surprise, put a hand on the mountain's arm. Not yet, he said. Not yet. Do not, Cersei said, and it was not clear whether she was speaking to Ser Gregor or to herself. Do not now. Do, Tyrion said softly. Du surrender. The city will live if you do this one thing. He looked at Jaime. He looked at his sister. For once, Cersei, love something other than yourself in a way that matters. Cersei stared at him as if he were a painting that had not been hung straight. And then she did a thing that shrank her more than tears would have. She nodded. It was very small. It was the smallest thing she had done that mattered in her life. I will not be paraded, she said, chin lifting like pride's ash. The child. She put her hand over her belly in a gesture that would have looked like innocence to a kinder eye. No parades, Tyrion said, because he was tired of reasons to hate, and this was one he could put on a hook and leave there without Lou. King at it every day to make sure it still held. Daenerys took the red keep not with fire but with the weight of a dragon landing on a courtyard built for men on horses. The old stone cracked as if tired of being old. She slid from Drogon's neck and stood in a heat that would have made another woman sway. She did not sway. Her hair was loose and wild from wind and battle, and her eyes were a sky a storm had decided to keep. Jon came later, because he had stayed to make sure a small square near the Street of Flower did not turn green again when a broken jar refound a wick. He came with Clegganbull, the city would call it later, in a tavern that had not yet been rebuilt, and men would argue about whether the Hound had cheated by moving left when no one moves left, or whether the mountain had cheated by being dead and not dead both. In the courtyard itself, there were only 2 brothers and the knife of everything between them. Jon saw it and had no words. Arya, who had followed a wolf's map of shadow and sound to this very place because the world sometimes gives you what you want to prove you wanted the wrong thing, saw it and did not blink. They fought. The mountain's sword made noises that men remember in the marrow of their bones because those noises are what men fear when they sleep. Iron hitting iron, iron hitting stone, iron hitting soft meat. The Hound bled and laughed, and then bled and did not laugh, and then bled and did not make any noise at all. He moved with the kind of grace ugly men have when they have never loved their bodies but have used them hard enough to respect the use. The mountain moved like a thing remembering motions it had learned a lifetime ago. Qyburn made a small sound when the Hound drove him under Ser Gregor's heel without meaning to. It was the sound men make when a jar breaks, but they know there are others like it in the world, and they cannot mourn this one too loudly. It might have gone another way. Many things that day might have. The wind shifted. A kicked brazier fell. The torch that tumbled rolled toward a hairline crack in a paving stone where green had seeped up and dried at the edge like old candle wax. The green flared at the touch of the ember, angry at being remembered. The mountain turned his head, for once not because someone had moved but because flame had a voice he knew. The Hound took that heartbeat and drove steel through the meat left where a man's heart had been if the man had been a man. The mountain did not fall. He paused like a thought changing its shape. Then Arya was there with a knife where a man's neck meets his skull, a place she had memorized when she was learning how to stop breathing like a girl. She looked up into the black pits where eyes had been and did not see herself. The blade went in. The mountain took a step that had no reason behind it except that sometimes men step. Then he fell and was still. Silence came down like dust after that. The kind of silence that is not empty at all but full of little sounds. The drip of blood, the rattle of a sword at last deciding to settle, the clack of a bit in a horse's mouth outside, men swallowing and feeling their own throats with surprise. "Take her," Daenerys said. Her hand did not shake. "Take her to a cell. We will have a trial that men will call just because it looks like one, and then we will do what must be done whether we call it justice or not." Tyrion let his breath out slowly. Davos looked at the sky and decided he might live through this day and never look at a bell with affection again. Jon felt Rhaegal's weight shift, an itch under scales, a beast listening to men decide WHI.CH words would shape the next hours. He found Daenerys's eyes and held them, and there was a bridge there between them that had been built of bones and fire and was still standing. "Your people live," he said. "You spared them." "I did not spare them," she said, weary in the truth. "You moved them. They spared themselves because you asked them to. Do not put on me your mercies, Jon Snow." "You let me try," he said, which was not mercy but had something in it like the seed of mercy. She looked at him until she could bear it no more and looked away. The courtiers of this day were smoke and men who were not made for court but had come anyway. The trial would come. The talk, the sifting of sins, the counting of dead who had a number you would know only after you had gone to every street and lifted every rag. But for that moment, the city drew its breath and found that it could hold it without choking. They put Cersei in a cell under stone that remembered kings and rats both. Qyburn went on the bier that the pyre took later without much ceremony. The mountain went to a place men would make sniggering jokes about for years and then, in private, cross themselves. The hound had a wound that looked like a bite from a beast with more teeth than sense. Arya sewed it with a set jaw while he made the small noises men make when they refused to beg a girl to be gentler. She told him to shut up. He told her to learn to tie a knot that wouldn't come undone, and she told him his head was in the way. It was the closest they came to praying. The dragon pit became a city for a day, then two. Its old stone hollowed to hold the stubborn life the Targaryens had kept there once in chains. People slept under their own breath and then under the breath of their neighbors. Food lines formed. Davos put boys with whistles on the edges to stop the strong from cutting in. Not because he believed in lines, but because men are calmer when they believe they are being watched by someone who isn't a god. Tyrion found water and made men bring it in anything that would hold water. Cups, hats, a clean skull from the charnel house that someone swore had belonged to a saint, though the saint probably would have preferred wine. Jon hauled buckets because it was work and he could do it, and because not doing it while men looked at him had started to feel like a lie. Daenerys moved through the camp like a ghost whose feet did not know to make sounds on stone. Some people cheered when they saw her. Some ducked their heads. A very few kept their eyes stubbornly on their own hands. She noted each reaction and hated the fact that she noted them. She went to the high place on the pit's edge where she could look down into a world that had not burned. Her dragons behind her like two long shadows that leaned very slowly. Jon found her there when the sun had broken its teeth on the horizon for the second time. He stood at her side and did not touch her. Rhaegal shifted on his haunches and huffed, smoke spilling from his nostrils in a lazy ribbon. "My father set himself on fire in this city," she said. "He burned to keep what he already had. They told me as if it were a story I could learn from the way a child learns how to hold a spoon." "I know," Jon said. He watched a boy in the pit chase a girl with a stick turned into a wooden sword. The girl turned and hit him so flatly and solidly that the boy sat down and began to laugh. "You were not him today. Not yet," she said, and the honesty of it exhausted him in a way lies never had. She turned her head. He would have burned them all to keep the idea of his own name clean. She stopped. "I don't even know if I know what my name means anymore. Except that when I speak it, men listen. And some men love it. Some men fear it. Love and fear look the same from a dragon's back." "I told them to live," Jon said. "I can't tell you what to be." She looked at him, and the bridge between them swung under a wind that had not been there a moment before. "You already have," she said, not accusingly, but with the exhausted quiet of a woman who has counted too much for one day. She looked at the pit again. "They asked me to be merciful when the bells rang. I was merciful because there was, for a heartbeat, no one to set on fire but stone. But I still want. She was not sure she had words for what she wanted. I want what I was promised when my brother sold me to a horse lord in a language I did not yet understand. I want the hall where men bend the knee not because they are afraid but because they are tired of kneeling to liars. You'll have it, he said. He sounded so certain that it made her flinch. You took the city. You did it without burning it to ash. They'll build you a statue for that alone. I don't want statues, she said, and that too was true. They make birds shite on them. From below, a bell rang once, only once, a slow, tired sound, as if the bell had been hung on a string that was also a tendon in the heart of the city, and someone had touched it with a gentle finger to ask the question. Are we still here? The sound went out and came back changed, the way sound does in a place full of people. Tyrion came to them with dust ground so deep into his lines that he looked like an older man who had been trying to wash a face that did not belong to him. The lords will come, he said, as if reporting that weather would follow seasons. Those that are near enough to smell the carrion, at least. They will want to see a trial. They will want to say that we did it properly. We will do it properly, Daenerys said. We will show them we can. And then kill her, Tyrion said, not unkindly. He was too tired for kindness to have an edge. The child is a card she would play, Daenerys said. And I have the deck now. They tried Cersei in the throne room that had been built to look like a forest of spears, and that day it looked more like a barn full of sick horses. The lords came, some in haste and some with a stylized slowness that meant to insult and only managed to embarrass. Sansa was not there. She had sent ravens with words that could be read as support if you wanted them to and as warning if you were careful. Gendry came, not as a lord comfortable with his name, but as a smith who had been told to sit in a certain place and look at a certain woman and be certain about what he felt. Brienne stood with a hand on her sword and another on nothing visible. Varys did not come. He had left Dragonstone too early with letters too many, and had been found near a cliff by men who knew how to hold a man between two arms that did not tremble. Daenerys had burned him because Tyrion had told her he was not to be trusted, and because Varys had been unwise enough to give her the kindness of telling her that to her face. That had been before the bells. Another world. It had happened there. This had happened here. Cersei was defiant, then bored, then something smaller, then so still that the only movement in her face was the flicker of the candlelight. She asked for wine. They did not give it to her. She asked for her brother. Jaime did not come. He sat in a chamber with a window and looked at his hand and then out at a city that had not burned and thought of a girl with brown eyes and a small smile that made his chest hurt in a way he had never had a word for. He held himself as still as a man holds himself when he is trying not to vomit. Bronn came to his door once and leaned against it and said nothing for a very long time and then said, "You've had better days, Lannister." Jaime said nothing. Bronn left again. The trial was theater. They all knew it. The sentence came anyway. A stone put down where a stone belongs. Daenerys gave it in a voice that did not shake. Not even when Cersei laughed at her and called her a pretender with pretty hair and a knack for collecting surplus men. "By fire," the queen said. "Not wildfire," Jon said, because it was the only thing he could take from that moment and still look at himself later. He stepped forward in the silence that followed as if stepping onto ice that might crack under him. Burning a queen with the thing she hoarded would make a story men set to a bawdy tune. Give her a cleaner death. Cleaner? Daenerys repeated, as if the word were a foreign coin someone had tried to pay her with. She looked at Jon for a long moment, and then she nodded, one of those small nods that sign a day's worth of struggle. "By sword," she said, and the swords in the room all knew they were included in the we of that. Cersei died like a woman who had never fed any god but herself and was now surprised to find that God would not pay her back with interest. She did not cry. She did not beg. She looked at the sword and at the hands that held it and then at the Dragon Queen. And if there was a pain in her eyes that belonged to anything other than herself, it did not show. Grey Worm did it. He did it clean. He did it the way he had been taught to. When it was done, he stood and felt neither larger nor smaller. He felt the same emptiness he had always carried and now would always carry. He did not look at Jon. He did not look at anyone. He went and stood where he could see the sea and hated it for being too big to kill. After, the city still stank of smoke and men, but the color was different. Not the bright, terrible color of green and only sometimes the greasy orange of burning pitch. The color was the dun of old stone and the red of meat and the blue of cheap cloth and the brown of bread. Jon walked streets that would, in 10 years, be called the Old Quarter because people forget that everything is always old to something else. Men called him the man who had told them to live, and he ducked his head because he was bad at being praised and worse at being loved. Children looked up at him and made the sign of wings with their hands and laughed silly dragon laughs that made him smile despite himself. Tyrion put the city in order, one small order at a time. He worked with Davos to get food from ships that had once belonged to men now charred, and to coax farmers who had hidden in their fields to come back into market with the thin hungry cows they had saved and the thick hungry children they had grown. He sent the Dothraki to hunt because Dothraki liked to hunt and because a hunted boar turned into food faster than a conquered gate turned into anything. He sent ravens that read like sighs to the north and to the Vale and to the Riverlands, telling them that the dragon had taken the capital and tried not to burn it, and could they please bring beans. Sansa wrote back with a letter that smelled faintly of pine because Sansa made everything smell faintly of something better than it was. She told him she was glad of the bells and that the North would remain the North, in what passed for courtesy. Tyrion read it to Jon and they looked at each other and did not say what they had always known. That love and war both come home dirty. Daenerys stood before the Iron Throne and laid her hand on a sword hilt that had been once a king's and once a smith's and once a fool's and once a drunkard's. She did not sit in it. She did not think she would ever sit in it. Not as long as there were men in the room who would count the resting of her weight as a reason to assess the weight of their own heads. She looked at Jon. He looked at her. The city breathed. "You saved them," she said again, more quietly than before. "You saved them," he countered, stubborn in that small thing. "You let me try." She laughed then, once, a small, surprised sound, like a girl remembering a different room. "I do not know how to be the thing they want," she said. "Which thing?" he asked. "There are always too many." "Their mother?" she said, and the word made him taste smoke and snow and blood and the iron of his own tongue. "Their queen." She looked down. "Your wife, if we had been born in a story that meant to be kind to us." He did not wince. He did not move. He looked at her and thought of the first time he had taken a breath after dying, and how he had not wanted it and still had had to take it. "We don't get kind stories," he said. "We get this." "This?" she said, and looked around at the heap of iron that was a chair for a man with no spine. There would be years after that day, and those years would hold winter's eddies and summer's harsh light, and the smell of rain on dust, and the taste of apples grown in a city that had learned that trees and dragons can share a sky so long as both are given lanes. There would be letters between sisters and brothers that did not always arrive. There would be men who tried to kill what they could not vote out and men who tried to love what they could not understand. There would be a girl with a needle who sailed west and sent back no word because the world beyond words is better at keeping its secrets. There would be a hound who limped and swore and taught boys to swing an axe the way he had wished someone had taught him to swing a soft word. There would be a gray worm who left this continent because it had nothing for him but the old emptiness. And in a city across the sea where the air did not care whose God's name was said, he would find a quieter emptiness he could live in. There would be a queen who learned to demand bread before statues, and a king who would never call himself a king, and a dragon with a torn wing who learned to fly true anyway, and another dragon with a breath like a song turned into a weapon, and the sky would sometimes hold both at once. But that first night after, when the ashes had blown and settled and the bells hung silent, Jon stood again on the basalt at Dragonstone and listened to the sea pull at the island like a dog tugging a rope. Rhaegal slept behind him like a hill with the slow tide of breath going in and out. Jon's hands were empty. He did not miss the sword. He missed a woman whose laughter had been a promise made before anyone could mark it down and call it a promise. He heard steps and did not turn because he knew those steps. Tyrion came and stood beside him with the caution of a man who expects the wind to try to take him and has brought a stone in his pocket to give it something else to hold. "You grew," Tyrion said. That is what people say to children. I suppose I could say it to cities too. She will need you. The city will need you. You will need you. Find a way to be 3 men without losing the one that wakes and breathes. I'm not 3 men, Jon said. I barely pass for one. You pass for one, Tyrion agreed. Some days that is enough. Today it was enough to keep bricks from turning to bones. He tilted his head, considering the water with a detached interest that suggested that if the sea decided to give up and pour itself out into the sky, he would be willing to see what shape that made too. I have always liked bells, he said. They mean things. They mean beginnings. They mean endings. Today they meant both again. I hate that I love symmetry. Jon said nothing. The wind made his eyes water. Tyrion reached into his pocket and took out something small and showed it to Jon in the cupped shadow of his hand. It was a bell, the size of a walnut, dented and old, of no value to anyone who wanted to buy and sell. From my father's old rooms, he said. I found it when I was hiding from a man who makes chairs look useful. I thought I might keep it to remind me that even iron is only iron. But you take it. It will sound proper in the north. Or on a dragon's back. Jon closed his hand around it. It was heavier than it looked. It felt like a thing a man might ring when he had to call himself back to a room he was leaving in his mind. Thank you, he said. Tyrion shrugged in that way men do when they are trying to make a gift small enough to accept. Don't make me regret it, he said. I've regretted most things in my life. I'm tired. They were quiet for a while. The moon came up, a shard bitten from an old loaf, and the sea wore it on its back like a jug's worth of milk spilled by a careless god. Rhaegal snored once, oddly human, and Jon smiled without meaning to. Do you think, Jon asked, speaking into the wind so that it would take most of the question and leave only what he could bear to hear out loud, that it matters? What we did today, in 100 years, in 10. It matters now, Tyrion said, almost with impatience. That is the only time men ever really live in. The dead would tell you the same, if they could be bothered. He turned and clasped Jon's shoulder. Sleep, Lord Snow. Tomorrow we begin the delicate work of convincing people who have survived being saved that they are grateful. After Tyrion left, Jon stood until the cold took his bones and then a little longer because he was stubborn. He lifted the small bell once and let it chime. The sound was thin and immediate and almost lost at once in the night, and yet it hung in his ear afterward in a way that was almost kindness. He turned to go inside. Rhaegal lifted his head and watched him, eye bright in the moonlight, and then lowered it again with a huff that warmed Jon's legs. Dragons have their own sense of what is worth remembering. Men's bells likely puzzled them. Fire makes its own music. In the morning, the city woke to a sky that was no longer thinking about blood. Men looked down at their hands and found they were empty. Women looked at their children and found them breathing. The Dragon Queen walked a street that smelled of baking and piss and old ash, and the man beside her nodded to people who did not know whether to bow. Behind them, a green dragon placed his feet as carefully as a cat stepping between cups on a table, and a black dragon moved above them with a dignity that had no word in any tongue men spoke now. When they came to the square where the first green fire had taken its by, they stopped. The stones there were blackened. The air still wore a taste of old danger. A child had drawn a dragon on one of the walls with charcoal, and men had not cleaned it because men leave the marks of a day that did not kill them where they can see them and feel braver. Daenerys lifted her head. I would like a bell hung here, she said to no one and to everyone. A small one, not to call them to me, to call them away when they must go. We forget how to leave places. I would like us to remember. She looked at Jon and shook her head, smiling a little. Look at me, she said, learning to love bells. Careful, he said, surprising himself, and she tilted her head like a girl. They mean beginnings. He touched the iron in his pocket. And endings. Then let us begin, she said, and her voice, for the first time since a girl had lost her head to another woman's malice, was not edged with grief alone but with something that had once been hope and might be that again. She stepped forward, and the city, uncertain and stubborn and hungry as a dog and as loyal when it is fed the right way, stepped with her. On the hills beyond the walls, where the wind has always gone to take larger breaths, the grass moved as if the earth were sleeping under it. The old road to the dragon pit had already worn new grooves under so many feet. Men will make a road anywhere they go in numbers enough. The bells did not ring that day. They hung quiet, iron against quiet. But if someone had stood very still at the right corner and tilted his head, he might have heard a different sound. A dragon laughing, perhaps, or only the low scrape of iron in a pocket, and a man remembering to be a man in the only time there is, the particular now he had saved, imperfect, human, and alive.